On January 3, 2026, the United States executed a complex military operation codenamed Operation Absolute Resolve, targeting Venezuelan sitting head of state President Nicolás Maduro. This combined special operational forces, conventional air power, and cyber warfare capabilities. The operation demonstrated US capabilities when it comes to the deployment of special forces for operational detachment, Delta Force. The mission, which was a success, was the second act of foreign intervention by the Trump administration, following the Iran bombing of high-threat nuclear development facilities. In the last few days, the raid, though successful, has raised significant questions about sovereignty, proportionality of force, legality of the initiative both at a domestic and international level, and ultimately, regional stability implications. Hey noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking. In the last few days we have seen quite an interesting undertaking unfold, and when I say we have seen, I mean it metaphorically, because the whole country was asleep while the entire incursion occurred, and I'm actually quite impressed with how swift and professional this was. Now, I've been looking at this closely, and of course there are a lot of different angles that we could discuss: the political angle, the legal angle, the one that I'm mostly interested in, which is the tactical/strategic angle, particularly when it comes to how US forces achieved air supremacy, the overwhelming firepower used to neutralize Maduro's security forces. But I think all of these aspects need to be covered. We'll cover them all one step at a time. But the first thing I want to say is, regardless of what you think when it comes to the legality or the justifications behind this action taken by the President of the United States and his administration, one thing is for sure: this is beneficial to the people of Venezuela in terms of the loosening of the horrific grip that the likes of Maduro, a horrendous dictator who has had that grip on the local population for about 2 decades now. And if you've followed any of that, or you've seen any of the clips and videos that show the type of tactics that he employed on his own population, the number of people that is caused to die under his despotic rule, whatever you think, the fact that he's no longer in power is a net positive, at least from the perspective of Venezuelan population. Now, first and foremost, I'd like to discuss what the motives could be when it comes to this action. And obviously, the main justification or route that appears to have been taken by President Trump has been the justification under the cause of the accusation of narco-trafficking, the idea of moving drugs into the United States. There is also the angle of removing a head of state who is illegitimate, at least from the perspective of the White House and the local population. But then there is also the aspect of, that we need to talk about, how rich in oil Venezuela as a country is. In fact, for those who don't know, it is the primary source of oil at a global level. So whoever controls that oil not only has a monumental asset in terms of monetary gain and financial incentive, but it also controls now, and therefore disrupts, the movement of that oil towards other foreign powers, China, Russia, which could also be in the interests of the United States. In other words, the removal of Maduro and the current control of Venezuela in the hands of the United States, we'll talk about how long that can last. In fact, it has to do with a few statutes that dictate that at the constitutional level. But regardless of that, we'll talk about it later. That is an important event when it comes to the redistribution of power and power dynamics at a geopolitical level. Now let's have a look at the operation step by step. The operation employed a synchronized approach involving the Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta Force, conducted a direct action mission to capture Maduro and his wife Cilia Flores at their compound in Caracas, a heavily fortified position. Not an easy task. It was carried out flawlessly. The operation also had aviation support. The 160th Special Operation Aviation Regiment provided MH-60M Black Hawk helicopters and potentially MH-6, executing low-level penetration across the Caribbean. As many as 150 aircrafts participated, which ensured US air superiority and strike components. The combat vehicles, including F-22 Raptors, B-1 bombers from Dyess Air Force Base and F-35A from the Vermont Air National Guard, All of these assets conducted suppression of enemy air defenses and strategic strikes on military infrastructure. Another aspect of this entire operation was intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance. Based on our current information and understanding of events, an RQ-170 Sentinel stealth drone was observed providing overwatch, while CIA personnel embedded in country provided human intelligence on Maduro's movement. US Cyber Command disrupted Venezuelan power infrastructure, creating operational darkness to facilitate land deployment of forces. The deployment included also substantial naval assets, with the USS Gerald R. Ford carrier ready for activation. This operation clearly marks a significant escalation in US foreign policy towards Venezuela, justified, as we will see, among other things, under narco-terrorism charges related to Cartel of the Suns network. Venezuelan and Cuban officials reported over 80 fatalities, including 32 Cuban military and intelligence personnel. Maduro and Flores were extracted via USS Iwo Jima unscathed and subsequently transported to Stewart Air National Guard Base in New York for federal prosecution. No American combat fatalities. Now, when it comes to the legal aspect, nations under international law are theoretically bound to respect other nations' sovereignty. I say theoretically because if any of you has ever opened a book of history, you know that in the majority of cases, whenever there is a war, an invasion, an attack, the borders are breached. Now, generally speaking, there is some form of justification, particularly when it comes to a declaration of war, which this one isn't, and such justifications or excuses are what we usually call casus belli. An important aspect that we need to discuss is the fact that this action was taken without congressional approval, which means that Congress was not notified ahead. Now, given it is possible that one of the excuses at a military level would be that the element of surprise was in fact a necessary, if not pivotal, aspect of the success of this mission, not to mention that theoretically and technically you need approval from Congress for declaring wars. But this one is not a war. It was over in 8 hours. But regardless of the technicalities, we will dig deeper on this, and I will in fact present two opposing views from two separate professors of law. One who strongly disagrees with Trump, and the other who seems to agree with the legality of what he has done, so that then you can make your own mind. However, when it comes to maintaining the approval of the public, I personally believe that an important, if not crucial element when it comes to how the administration will seek to continue this in the next few steps, the following aspect is going to be essential. Now, talking about the legal aspects, there are several experts that have weighed in. The problem is that they disagree and they have completely opposite views. So I'm going to point you to a couple of professors and then you choose the one you want to side with. The channel called Democracy Now! Has a video called Law Professor David Cole on the illegality of US attack on Venezuela. And this is the presenter. And then the other video is going to be this one from ABC 7 News. Was the capture of Nicolas Maduro legal? An expert weighs in. So they both contacted an expert, and they came to completely different and in fact opposing conclusion. The expert chosen by Democracy Now!, who is the one who opposes Trump and in general the administration, is David Cole, professor, Georgetown University Law Center, and generally speaking, I would have let it play, but these kind of news networks tend to copy claim like maniacs, and YouTube always doesn't make it very easy on us, so I'm not gonna let it play. But I will point you to an article that he wrote called Trump's War, David Cole, the invasion of Venezuela is now it's not law enforcement, it is imperialism pure and simple. And that is his perspective from a legal standpoint. However, we have a completely opposite perspective, which comes from another professor that we can see on this video. Of course, all the links will be in the description. And it's this professor here, and he is Jed Rubenfeld, a professor of constitutional law at Yale Law School. And he instead, as you will see if you watch the video, I've already watched both in their entirety, weighs in on the fact that indeed it isn't as big of an imperialism and all the kind of stuff, and in fact it seems to be pointing to a lot of other instances historically where the United States has done the exact same thing, underlining the difference between constitutional law as opposed to international law, with the fact that international law weighs below it. And so he was kind of presenting a little bit of a pro-administration position from a legal perspective. If the US is going to maintain control over the oil assets, then the economic interests and the wealth generated thereof will have to be, at least in a part, be redistributed towards the local population. In other words, American control of Venezuelan oil production facilities will have to foster economic stability and eventually increase GDP growth in order to benefit the Venezuelan people as well as the American people. Now, the fact that a dictator has been removed from power, once democratic rule of law will be again re-established, this should help the country in general to recover from the 2 decades of complete and utter socialist hellhole and economic failure and collapse, also thanks to the removal of sanctions, for instance, that have been placed against the country because of the tyrannical dictatorship. What about at an international level? What about international law, which has been brought up a lot by some of the people that are going against this? And I would like to underline that it's actually quite interesting that the people that seem to complain about this don't really seem to care about the Venezuelan people. That's an interesting aspect, because up to 15 minutes ago I thought that they were against dictators, but seems like that it's once again a situation of rules for me, not for thee. The reality of fact when it comes to international law is the following: it is aspirational, but it cannot be mechanically enforced. And so any form of law that cannot be enforced, it's basically non-existent. Once again, there is no system of enforcement for this specific aspect of the statutes that we call UN Charter. So there will be no repercussions for it whatsoever. The only repercussion could be a general condemnation, but it doesn't seem like the UN is doing that, and I personally don't think they will. Now, what about the legality of maintaining boots on the ground and US control of Venezuela, running the country, as President Trump has been saying? Well, as for the first 60 days, that's legal. That can be pushed to 90. After that, it will need congressional support. Or this would be possibly one of the first cases in which a president completely disregards constitutional authority. And keep in mind that in the United States, the Constitution is more important than any international law. The Constitution is above that. Now, you might think that he could do that and just not care and do whatever he wants. But then again, the more likely scenario, if he does choose to maintain armed forces and control of Venezuela, is that he will get that congressional approval at that point. Because do remember, the Republicans do control both the Senate and the House. Or by the 90th day, the new head of state will be elected, and it will be someone who is, let's just say, interested and focused on cooperation with the US. Now, as we will see when listening to the experts, one of the things mentioned is that what President Trump did was also done by several other presidents, and so there is a precedent, if you will. In fact, more than one. 1965, USA invasion of Dominican Republic. 1983, invasion of Grenada by the Reagan administration. Panama, in order to take into custody Mariel Noriega for a very similar reason of allegations that had to do with drug trafficking. Moreover, Clinton bombed Yugoslavia, Obama bombed Libya, and as far as I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, but both of these actions occurred without congressional approval. Now, is it theoretically wrong to move without congressional approval? Yes or no will depend on how you interpret the United States Constitution. Is this an act of war? Is it, as they claim, an act of law enforcement, considering that FBI agents were also involved in this operation in order to arrest and then charge in New York Maduro? Well, this is for judges to say, but it remains the fact that whether they agree with it or not, it's very unlikely, having a look at the last 200 years of how presidents have acted in the United States anyways, that there will be any repercussions. A president is in fact in power. They do it all the time. And I don't think they're going to stop. If they didn't stop before, they're not going to stop now. If you're enjoying this video so far, please take a moment to check out my Patreon page. With as little as a $5 support, you can help us ensure that we can continue to produce high quality and high researched content. And at the same time, you get access to polls, extra videos, unlisted streams, and much more. Thank you so much. Now, when it comes to the operation proper, a lot of channels have spoken about it, described it step by step. I did a little bit, but if there is one channel that is indeed my favorite, if you look here on the side, there are a lot of channels that spoke about this, but to be honest, I don't think anyone can do it better than Cappy Army, former 11B infantryman, part journalist, and he is like top-notch, really good content, and tends to be very professional when it comes to description of both war, tactics and geopolitics. Very neutral source of information, so if you're not subscribed to him, you absolutely should. To give you a little bit of a demo before you do that, to kind of convince you that this guy is the guy, I'm going to react a little bit to part of his video titled How US Delta Force Raid Captured Maduro, so that we can also get some extra information out there that is well sourced and well researched. I won't react to the whole thing. I've already watched the whole thing. One thing I'm going to tell you is that one of the sections that I will not react to, which happens towards the end, is where he talks about some possible conspiracies or ideas that when it comes to theories, let's say, when it comes to some betrayal and treason within the Venezuelan government that may have facilitated the operation, but I'll leave that one for you to click the link in the description and check the video. But for now, let's see what we can learn, and I want to put myself here.
America's back toppling again, because today we're going to learn how Delta Force captured Maduro from a heavily fortified base inside Venezuela, and examine the massive 150 aircraft air campaign overhead. Then we'll look at who's actually in control of the country now. The first thing you need to know is the American raid really started 4 months ago, with what's called Phase 1 shaping operations. It began in August when a group of CIA officers were secretly inserted on the ground into the country. They created intelligence packets that tracked Venezuelan President Maduro's movements down to the hour, and they operated a fleet of stealth drones that sent constant live updates professionally.
Isn't that insane? Of course, this is an operation that took months and months, and I sometimes find it ridiculous when some of the people that have to complain about anything that the current administration does, not just the things that they actually think are bad, but in general, just as a in principle, and they say, oh, first they say it's illegal what he did, but then on the second part of the same sentence they'll tell you, well, why didn't you do it to Putin then? And the thing is, like, good luck with that. Like, this already took months and months, and I mean, I watched something that Trump said afterwards, and he said that they also had a plan B, in the sense that they were ready to continue had the operation not been a success immediately, like it was. Like, if they needed to stay there and the guy fortified and there were some problems, they would have continued. So they had planned the possibility of it not going as well as it did. And now imagine if that happened with an operation like this in Russia. What is the main difference? Well, first and foremost, the type of military that the country can field, but also Venezuela doesn't have nukes. Putin does have nukes. So what happens if you F up? This is like unbelievable that people would say that, like as if it's a piece of cake. This already took months and months, and it's incredible what they managed to do.
Stalking his position. The clandestine operation developed what's called a pattern of life, which is fancy intelligence speak for what we would call a daily routine. This way, intelligence officers narrowed down Maduro's location to Fort Tiuna military complex, the large base that lies just south of the capital of Caracas, where 3 million people live. On Saturday, January 3rd, 2026, in the dead of night at 2 a.m. local time, the U.S. government gave the green light on Operation Codename Absolute Resolve. The U.S. military launched a wave of targeted missile strikes all across the capital city. Oh boy, here I go toppling again. Bombs were launched from 20 different bases and ships. The ground assault element chosen for the raid was 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. And somewhat surprisingly, law enforcement from FBI agents from the hostage rescue team were also embedded alongside them to arrest Maduro.
I wouldn't say surprisingly, considering the fact that, as we saw, was one of the justifications that they used, and they said it's a law enforcement operation, it's not a military invasion. And of course, how can you say that? How can you claim that if law enforcement isn't present? So I think that's one of the reasons why they were there. In fact, the main reason.
The bold tactics used for the insertion method shocked many military analysts. Reportedly, 11 American helicopters from the elite 160th SOAR Night Stalkers were deployed to spearhead this raid. SOAR is like the stunt drivers, but for helicopters, and they're loaded with like 300 special operators in the back. The team launched from the USS Iwo Jima Navy amphibious assault ship that's parked just a few miles off the coast of Venezuela. They flew low, only about 100 feet above the Caribbean Sea, to avoid enemy radar detection.
Incredible.
Then they traveled the dangerous stretch of 10 miles over land from the northern shores to Fort Tiuna. They came under fire en route. One helicopter was reportedly damaged, but it was still able to remain operational.
This stuff is armored, all right.
As the air assault flew across the capital, explosions erupted behind them, and it was uploaded live onto X. The operators used the MH-47G Chinooks and the MH-60L, which are special variant helicopters which have unique countermeasures. Then they approached the base, and the Ocean's 11-style raid began. Raiding this complex is an extraordinarily risky job to even undertake.
See, the analysis is impressive with this guy. Let's see why.
Tiuna has hardened concrete gates. There are pillboxes built into the mountain right there with firing positions on the high ground, armed guard towers, and continuous 24/7 patrols. It's sort of like Venezuela's version of the Pentagon. You can see here it's built right into the side of the mountain to give defenders the height advantage, as well as being able to dig deep underground. Its perimeter is pretty large. It's got about 2 miles wide by 4 miles long. Intelligence reports estimate that 5,000 of Maduro's most elite soldiers are assigned to this post. According to reports, Maduro constantly moved around the country, changing where he slept each night and throwing out burner phones to avoid.
Can you imagine the kind of intelligence they had to gather? Of course, they had people on the inside. Obviously, they had people. I heard that they had one of his generals actually on a, paid off.
Being tracked to this location. But the base's defenses were defeated partly because starting in mid-December, US Cyber Command laid the groundwork by targeting the power infrastructure, planting malware in their systems. When Cyber Command flipped the switch, it turned the lights off in the country, completely killing electricity to the base and large parts of the capital city. This cut off communications and made coordinating any kind of response extremely difficult. So the soldiers disembarked from the helicopters, the commandos hit the ground, and headed directly to the on-base house that Maduro was holed up in.
So they were so fast and so well coordinated, they couldn't retaliate. That's insane. No US casualties.
U.S. General Kane said that the raiding force came under direct fire, which prompted American forces to respond with, quote, overwhelming force and self-defense, end quote. Intelligence officers on the ground with the team helped them navigate the compound. They provided intel to this breaching team ahead of time that revealed that there would be thick, solid steel doors protecting Maduro. This information came from sources close to Maduro's inner circle. He had a kind of panic room that was completely sealed off. So operators brought explosive breaching charges and buzzsaws, and they were prepared to break through.
I heard that he didn't manage to reach it though.
Meanwhile, outside, the American direct action penetrator helicopter laid down close air support suppressing fire. This is a special beast mode upgun version of the Hilo. It went weapons free with 2 miniguns and Hydra rockets. But then Hilo started taking fire from enemy man-portable Igla air defense missiles. In response, pilots deployed their XM-216 Dark Flares. These defeat incoming missiles while staying invisible to the human eye. Delta Force finally breached into Maduro's on-base residence and found him. According to reports from CNN, who spoke to sources close to the raid, operators dragged Maduro out of bed, zip-tied, and blindfolded him while he was in the middle of sleeping.
So he didn't manage to get into that. Like, they came prepared to break through that heavily reinforced, sealed-off panic room, but he didn't even manage to get there. That's how effective and quick they were.
Then they led Maduro and his wife outside onto the Chinook helicopters and started flying back. Some Venezuelan military officer who gave away their location and was a source to the CIA just got $50 million in reward money. But this was only half the mission because the operators still had to safely extract.
Man, that guy that got the 50 million, I get it that he's super rich now, but he's going to have to spend quite a bit of that into security because goodness gracious, they're going to want him. Because do remember, when we look at this at a full country level, of course, the people are happy about this. But the dictator also had his own supporters, and those people are not going to be happy about it. And imagine all the criminal infrastructure in there is not going to be happy about it because of the ties that they probably had with the corrupt government. So this general will have to look behind his shoulders for the rest of his life. But then again, he probably thinks, who cares? I got 50 million, I'll spend 5 million into security, and I'll go into a freaking island. Probably that's what he's going to do, but just keep in mind.
It was vital to the mission mandate that they capture him alive.
Of course.
If Maduro was somehow killed en route or during exfiltration, it would look like America had ordered an assassination mission, which would cause all kinds of additional legal trouble.
Yeah.
This was one of the most geopolitically sensitive missions that I can think of in recent history. They had kicked the hornet's nest. The whole freaking country was coming down on them now. The question on every Delta Force operator's mind on the way back was, could they trust U.S. air power to cover their exfiltration? On their way out of Venezuela, the U.S.
100%.
air power continued to strike strategic military installations across the country to create a diversion for them to safely escape. F-22 Raptors, F-35 stealth fighters, F-18s, radar aircraft, and B-1 Lancer bombers participated in the attacks. They hit bases all over in the states of La Guaira, Miranda, and Aragua. This was to create multiple dilemmas. This was achieved thanks to an air campaign that had been happening simultaneously overhead that achieved air supremacy.
Incredible.
The operation reportedly involved 150 American fighter aircraft that had the goal of complete and total control of the skies. Fighter aircraft launched long-range precision missiles. Large explosions were heard across the capital. Local language news reporting stated that these explosions targeted air defense radar antennas. This was a massive seed operation, suppression of enemy air defenses. According to Oceanit Defender on X, good friend of the show, the air campaign destroyed Buck long-range air defense systems and knocked out all the armored vehicles at the bases. And since then, new satellite imagery has come out and shown the scale of the destruction at the base. Large parts of the base were entirely flattened.
This is incredible. We are halfway through. I'm going to stop it there with a react because it's not a long video, and I really want you guys to go and check it out because it's that good. It's that good. This guy is excellent. If it's the first time you ever watch him, yeah, I'm sure you're going to subscribe because top notch.